Bang, bang. This meeting comes to order. Is that right?
That's right.
John Paul, would you like to check and announce a quorum?
Yes, thank you. Madam President, with, let's see, 8 members and 1 student representative, you have quorum.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to, I guess, our second virtual working meeting during pandemic. Welcome. We've actually been talking a lot among ourselves and leadership groups about how we as a state board should be thinking about and talking about and collecting information about education during this time. So at a couple points tonight, we will touch on it. I think Marcus is going to say a little bit about an event we're going to have around community schools. And John Paul, I think, is going to also talk about that and set us up for a discussion about some possible other work around COVID, which I think we'll take up after we hear from a number of representatives from the special education world, who, as we all know, are having a lot of issues as we deal in this distance learning world. So with that, let me turn it over to Marcus for any comments on that or other things, and then to John Paul, and then we'll move in.
Sure. Are we giving full updates on kind of some of the stuff we've been thinking about, or?
Well, to talk about the roundtable idea.
Yeah, for sure. So one, good evening, everybody, and I hope everybody's remaining happy and healthy during this period. So we've been talking a lot about how to a certain extent, COVID has disrupted some of the conversations that we had planned throughout the year. And in response, I think, to the new way we're meeting and the new way we're engaging with our constituents, that we figure out creative ways to have some of those discussions. And one of those that came up that we had already planned a board-wide discussion on this summer was around community schools, and using, I think, the event that Jessica was able to have online with regarding our work around social studies as kind of a standard. We thought that we could also have a really rich discussion about the community school model, about the work that's being done in the district, but also around the country, and how that work is super important to closing some of the gaps and building the equity we're talking about post-COVID. And so next week on the 14th, John Paul, we'll be hosting an online forum where we'll be inviting partners and folks who are engaging in the community school work, both here locally, but also folks who are advocating for the issue around the country and advocating for its expansion around the country, to talk about how we can incorporate some of those best practices during the recovery and as we build equity long term. So looking forward to engaging all of you around that. Hopefully you'll also drive folks in your network and your constituents to that discussion to ask questions and engage with us. And then I think that's it. John Paul, if you have anything to add. John Paul has also been helping to lead the board's work around the community school model as a member of the Community School Advisory Committee, and I think now is chair. And so we're super excited about John Paul's involvement as well, and I'm glad to have been a partner on his work, not just on this event, but in our advocacy around expanding the community school model for the last few years. So, John Paul, anything?
Only to say that, members, we will have information out. We wanted to make sure to share it with you before we brought it any further to the public, but we will have information ready for you probably at either the end of this meeting or tomorrow morning, for you to be able to send out to your constituents. It will be on May 14th for starting at noon. And I'm really excited. We're going to have a fantastic principal from Burville Elementary. Principal Pilgrim will be joining us, along with a parent from that elementary school. And then the other person that joined us is Jose Munoz from the IEL and Community School in Schools. He is a fantastic leader in this work nationwide, and I spoke to him earlier this week, and he said he's so far had, I think he said, over 1,000 conversations since COVID started about this in various places around the country. So he is very well versed in exactly how to move these conversations forward. And I'm really appreciative of Vice President Batchelor agreeing to be a moderator for this discussion on how to bring this information home to our across the city. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. Any questions from anyone? All right, cool. Thanks, y'all.
So before moving in, so John Paul, we have this, oh, okay, I see our speakers are there, okay. So this work on community schools, it's obviously been ongoing. There've been a lot of efforts to build it out here. John Paul's been part of it. Marcus has been somewhat involved in it. Some of you have. I think the part of why it made sense to me to really try to lift this up right now is we've all talked about how much pressure there's going to be on the schools to deal with a whole range of mental health issues coming up. And if we only ask the school to do it, schools could be overwhelmed. Part of the idea of the community school model is that you have a structure that's cooperating with the school, that's right there at the school, that can help the school, but also may not overwhelm the school. So I'm very interested in it in part through that lens. So with that, I want to turn to some guests that we have tonight.
Madam President, I do have a number of things on my.
Oh, I'm sorry, John Paul. I thought you were turning it over. I'm sorry. Go. Excuse me.
No, it's all right. So members and members of and guests, thank you again for being here. I do want to remind everyone to try to keep your phones and computers muted as much as possible so that we prevent feedback and that type of thing. We are recording the meeting and also live streaming on our YouTube channel so that members of the public can view in real time. And I really appreciate the staff getting through this this sort of platform, making it work for all of us. I do want to note that I did send out a draft application for the Student Advisory Committee, which is something that we do yearly. It's a joint application for student representatives and Student Advisory Committee. It's the same application as we've used for the last couple of years, but the intention is to release that to the public within the next day or so, and have applications due by the end of the month so that we can do the selection process and have that ready for the June public meeting. So if anyone has any questions about the application, feel free to let me know. But otherwise, we'll proceed with getting it out into the public quickly.
Okay. I am used to being able to sit right next to John Paul and in between him and Marcus to get all the notes about where we're going. So thank you for everybody's patience. All right, I want to introduce 4 folks who are joining us who have been leaders and activists in the special ed community. And as I said, there have been a lot of issues around special ed during this period. A number of you have been trying to deal with them. So I'm not sure what order you guys are going to go in, but I'm going to start with Elizabeth Occhierdo from Children's Law Center. We also have Maria Blauer from AJE, Molly Whalen from DC Case, and I think Caitlin Banner from the Washington Lawyers Committee. And the idea here is they're going to talk to us for about maybe up to 10 minutes, just to sort of lay out some of the stuff they're facing and what they've been trying to do. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Elizabeth. And you all should have gotten in your packets before today copies of the FAQs that their coalition has developed, as well as a letter that they've sent to OSSE, I think is what was in it. Okay, with that, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and share some of the information that we've learned from our clients and the students that we represent, and also, some ideas about looking into the future and concerns that SPED students specifically are facing. And so, we'll start off with just talking about what's working well, a few examples of things that are going well, some things that might need improvement for SPED students, how we should be planning for reopening, And then really overall thoughts about how can we keep our students safe going forward with the looming threat of continued COVID pandemic issues. So what's working well? We were really impressed to see for some students how quickly they were able to access related services virtually. We've had really great success stories of some students that have been able to engage with things like virtual therapy, PT, and OT. But on the flip side, we're also seeing questions about, for gen ed parents, it's hard enough to do homeschooling, but then now you also have to do homeschooling and kind of help to referee and coordinate when children can access these related services virtually. So really thinking through, the balance of making sure that students are receiving the services that they're entitled to, but in a way that families can manage right now. We've also heard some really positive stories of gen ed students who may have been either not engaging with the school content as much, or had issues with truancy or school climate issues, that are really enjoying the distance learning and are able to participate virtually. So we think that highlighting that is also important. But another issue that we need to fix is there's been limited communication, in our opinion, between OSSE and LEAs and parents. So we've had issues with LEAs having questions about the OSSE guidance coming out, our own SPED attorneys having questions about the OSSE guidance and how it applies to individual clients, and then issues with parents being able to actually contact, for example, the special education coordinators at individual schools. We've asked for a list of contact information for parents to be able to access, and that hasn't been provided. So really in this time, making sure that communication is clear and that we have almost over communication with parents, I think would be really positive and really help students make sure that they're getting the services that they need. And then finally, making sure we're providing technical assistance for parents. We have the ability to actually write that into IEPs. And that kind of technical assistance would be critical for parents to be able to know just how to use all the different tech platforms needed, not just for learning, but for also the delivery of related services. So thinking about how can we better provide that TA for parents, through the IEP, I think will be really critical. Thinking forward to planning for reopening, a lot of students' evaluations have been pushed back due to the pandemic. And usually summer is a time where schools, pull back on staffing. So really, thinking through and pushing for staffing up during the summer months to figure out how we can get students evaluated for SPED services is going to be critical. And also figuring out how can we do some benchmarking during the summer months, so we can really think about if there's been regression, how much regression has there been, which will help us to plan for comp ed. We're also recommending that schools put together guidance for individual distance learning plans. So while the IEP remains completely intact, schools can be better communicating with parents about what services are able to be provided virtually, which services are not able to be provided virtually. And really clarifying that will help us to have those comp ed discussions later on during, after the school year is over. And comp ed remains a huge challenge. Even before the pandemic, we had a hard time getting enough comp ed providers to get our students the hours that they need. So rethinking comp ed and maybe moving back towards like a catalog model where parents can receive, a list of all the different comp ed providers and different activities that could qualify for comp ed, really kind of expanding that pool of comp ed activities might help us to meet that comp ed gap that we're going to see once the next school year starts. And finally, how do we keep students with disabilities safe going forward? We really think we need to focus on beefing up our home and hospital instruction. That's going to be something that a lot of students are going to need to rely on. And then thinking through the availability of school nurses and aides. This is something that we struggled with before the pandemic, ensuring that there were enough school nurses, for example, to ride the bus with students. That was a challenge that we were seeing then, and we're concerned that it's going to be a continued challenge, especially now during these times. And then also thinking through, changes with WMATA, with so many of our children with disabilities needing to rely on public transportation. What is the new WMATA going to look like, and how are those service changes or service interruptions going to impact students with disabilities and their ability to get to and from school? So those are just a few of the things we wanted to highlight for the group that we've been thinking through. We also provided you guys, like we said, with some of the suggestions we had for OSSE to improve their frequently asked questions section. And we've also been trying to give them recommendations about things like graduation requirements and keep an open line of communication. But we really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you, and we're happy to take any questions you might have.
Ruth, you need to unmute.
Questions? I can see hands. I think John Paul can see the hands up in the chat box. So, and let me also just acknowledge that Serena Hayes is here, who is our student ombudsman, and is Dan here? Dan Davis with the Student Advocates Office. So they should also feel free to get involved in this. Oh, Fraser. Okay. Unmute.
I have several questions, and I'll ask them and then sit back. How many students are being serviced for their 504s or IEPs during in the last month? And what has been done now that we have been in a month to help those students that haven't been serviced? And what about students with severe disabilities? At Cardozo, we had an autism section. That's just one example. And is there any talk about one-on-one at-home virtual sessions with students who need that kind of one-on-one? And I just want to reiterate how important it is for every school to have social workers, nurses, and psychologists, especially when we finally go back to school. And I'll say it again, that we're not trying to get back to normal. We're trying to get forward to the future and fix what was not working before. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start kind of working backwards and my colleagues can jump in. In terms of the one-to-one services, we have had a handful of clients who were eligible for one-to-one aids and who are now receiving, obviously not 8 hours of one-to-one support or instruction from an aide, for example, but they are able to get some time with them, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, kind of for like level setting, getting an agenda together for the day, kind of easing the child into the day's work plan. But it's very difficult, it's challenging with distance learning, right, to get someone that one-on-one support. And for our students with disabilities that make it difficult for them to attend, even with virtual learning, to sit and concentrate, a student who really needed that one-on-one aid in the classroom to help them remain engaged, it's very difficult to provide the services they're entitled to in that case. And so, the solution is really comp ed, is really at the end of this saying, what did the student receive? What were they entitled to? And the balance of that will have to be provided with some sort of compensatory education. And I'll let my colleagues jump in if they have any other comments on
Elizabeth,
that.
this is Molly Whalen, and we work with all of the non-public special education schools where DC students are served. And so we have a lot of very good examples of dealing with students with, low incidence disabilities like autism, cognitive disabilities, intellectual disabilities. And, some of our schools are doing amazing jobs. I'm quite impressed. And I think that's one of the messages I'm trying to get out to education leaders in our city, is that there seems to be oh, wow, this is going to be impossible. We shouldn't even try, or it's, too complicated. We've had a couple schools really be able to use one-on-one aids in Zoom calls. They do them with breakouts. They're helping with executive functioning. We also have adaptive OT and adaptive PE kind of woven into students' days, so they may have a 30-minute Zoom class with everybody else, and then they've got 15 minutes with them where they do calisthenics and wall push-ups and different things for sensory needs. So it can be very creative and it can be done, and we've got some really good examples in the area. But it's definitely not, kind of system-wide, and it's not broken down. We're really concerned about the mental health and the anxiety levels of our students. Surprisingly, some are actually doing better because they don't have the anxieties of navigating the school cafeteria or getting into the building or dealing with very noisy hallways, so they can access the education piece at the time. But I think I want to tie it back for the state board folks to really hear that what we're concerned about not coming out of OSSE is really detailed and engaged messages to the LEAs about how to do this and how to take advantage of the resources around. There's a couple of national groups that are doing collaborations on how to serve students with disabilities. We're really seeing, other than like kind of payment issues, OSSE's kind of been quiet about really kind of pulling this along. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of discrepancies between the various LEAs and DCPS, as with everything, so we're really, I think our group is very concerned about this very spotty kind of way of dealing with students with disabilities. Mr. O'Leary, I'm not sure when you were asking how many students that are being serviced per month, I don't know if anybody's got the exact number of students with IEPs. I think it's, I know is it 18%? Elizabeth might be able to jump in, but I don't have the numbers of 504s. But yeah, technically, all of those students should be receiving all of their related services and their services on the IEP every month and throughout this year. And I think that's the piece that we're, also going along with the DCPS is announcing that they're closing May 29th. There's a lot of concern. Most of these students are qualified for ESY because of regression issues. So if we're ending the school year early and there's a lot of confusion about ESY, we are really concerned about regression and our students with disabilities falling even further behind. And that's why we put that message in about Comp Ed.
Thank you. Dr. Gasoy?
Thank you. I actually had a follow-up question on the Comp Ed and also the catalog model. I was just wondering if you could, Elizabeth or Molly, explain a little bit more what that entails, what it looks like.
If you don't mind, this is Maria from AJE. I might be the best equipped to answer the catalog question.
Hi, Maria.
That's okay. Hi. So many years ago, when the district was in litigation around Blackman-Jones, there was a catalog created to allow families to have some choice and control over the compensatory services that their child would receive when the district was found to be non-compliant. For those of you who remember that time, there were mass findings of non-compliance. The district was regularly not implementing court orders and hearing officer decisions. As part of the remedy, there was a catalog created that families could pick from. And it was helpful at the beginning. I think it became less helpful as things went on because it became just a laptop in a lot of ways. But as we think about the services that we're going to have to be providing when things get back to whatever the new normal is, we don't have enough teachers and tutors to provide hours and hours of at-home tutoring in this service as missed services. And for a lot of our children, that's not particularly useful or usable. After an 80-hour day of school, it's very difficult to ask a kid to do another 2 hours of schooling. So one thing that some LEAs have done and been very creative around is looking at useful and usable compensatory education plans or missed services plans. And that can be very different. That doesn't have to be tutoring. That can be software programs. That can be other enrichment opportunities. That can be executive functioning coaching. But I think thinking broadly about what we need to give our kids to make up for the regression and the lack of progress will be helpful, because I don't think we're going to be able to grow the provider pool fast enough to be able to meet that service, to be able to meet the demand there. One thing I do want to flag is that in years past, the child's classroom teacher was allowed to sometimes provide compensatory education. So, for example, the student was in, Mrs. Johnson's class all year. He was entitled to X number of hours and didn't receive that. If he had a good relationship with his teacher, Mrs. Johnson could be authorized to provide additional services to him outside of the school day. That practice has pretty much stopped because there is a potential conflict of interest there. However, having the child have continuity of service delivery and continuity of teacher and continuity of instruction can be really, really helpful. That might be another way to kind of grow the pool of available providers, is if we allow the child's existing teacher to provide the missed services and compensatory education down the road. I do think that what Molly mentioned around ESY is going to be really important. OSSE just put out their guidance, I think Monday evening, around ESY, and that was perhaps not as helpful for many families as we would have hoped it would be. What the summer looks like for students with disabilities, especially those with significant disabilities, is really important. And the guidance from OSSE did not provide families with a lot of clarity around who would be eligible for ESY and how to consider this gap in time. So that's a space where I think both parents and LEAs need additional clarity.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you, John Paul. Thank you all for coming. So I had two questions. One specific to non-public placements. What's happening there? What should we be thinking about for students who are placed in non-public placements? The second is, if there is an opportunity for some students to go back for some limited in-person time this summer or early in what would be the next school year, can you just offer some suggestions on how LEAs could support families so that if there was a need to have rolling closures, like what kind of supports could be provided not just to students, but also to families should they be faced with a situation like this again?
This is Molly. I'll go ahead and answer the non-public question. I think you all probably know that we're about I think it's just under 900 students that are funded to attend non-public schools in the district, half from LEAs, charter LEAs, and half from DCPS, the numbers. And I think many of us in the system think that's a pretty stable number, that that's gonna, stay, as is. I would say I think that a lot of them are doing very, very well. I think the special ed non-public schools really reacted very quickly, and also have a lot of special educators that can do differentiated learning and doing that very quickly. We're seeing a lot of, just so that you all know, we're seeing a lot of both synchronistic and non-synchronistic kind of learning. So it's not just a classroom and live on Zoom, which would be synchronistic, but we also have in the schools teachers doing mini lessons on video where a student can access that at a later time. We're finding that that's a really good equity issue, because for students and families that have maybe one laptop or many kids in the program, or mom and dad are working and they can't support a student with a disability onto the class, they can do that in the evening, and they're in these small bites, but they're still their teachers. It's not watch this video on something. It's, their teachers doing something. We're seeing that with adaptive PE and OT session and an art class and all of those pieces. So I think they're doing rather well. I am concerned because of the regression issue, and it's something I don't know if we'd be able to get OSSE to agree to, but I think we're really, as a system, if we really cared about our kids, we would think about the eligibility and entitlement issue and be able to allow for a longer entitlement, especially for these students in their senior or last year. If we're just saying goodbye and they've missed, 4 months possible if they were leaving in a July program of vocational training and adaptive living skills training, and as well as their academics, we're really doing them a disservice, and I think we're going to see some concerns down the road. But I have to say, we had quite honestly, we had a lot of advocacy we had to do with OSSE. At first, they said they weren't going to pay the non-publics, and even though non-publics were providing, education and pretty robust virtual education, OSSE said it was just going to be 30 days. Then they said they didn't want to pay for related services, which is awful because almost every student in a non-public is getting speech and OT and social work and physical therapy, and that the schools are doing that. So I think we spent a lot of time kind of just fighting on that payment issue, which I'm sorry about. And I'm very concerned that we're not, one of our recommendations is putting together a task force that would really kind of pull together some of these good ideas and some of these pieces that are working. So that I can answer non-public. If somebody else on my team can answer the second question, I think they are probably better at it.
Yeah, I think in order to plan for moving forward, we need to consider being able to offer families and support families with a variety of options. So we have a lot of children that we represent who have grandparent caregivers, for example. And so while they may be healthy and able to return to a school environment, doing so would put their grandparent caregivers or, an immunocompromised household member at risk. So being able to really kind of pivot between, distance learning or in-person learning and be able to support families through making that choice, I think is going to be really critical. And then continuing to address the digital divide. I'm sure this is something, we all have been putting so much time and energy into really figuring out, but it's going to be something that continues to persist. So not just handing out a device and making sure everyone has a device, but making sure that families understand how to use the device, feel comfortable using the device, and helping their student kind of work through these tech issues. And that kind of comes back down to providing that technical assistance to the families and to the students.
And
yeah. Oh, go ahead, Maria.
Well, I think you and I are probably thinking about the same thing. Dr. Sutter, when you talked a little bit about summer school and ESY in the summer, I think there's two things I really want to flag there. One is that if we are opening schools back up, especially for summer school, for credit-bearing opportunities, we have got to make sure that special education services are also available over the summer. This has been a long-standing huge gap, and it's a huge equity issue because for students with disabilities who are in the credit-bearing track, they don't have an option frequently to receive summer school, credit-bearing opportunities, earn credits over the summer, and get the specialized instruction they need. Their non-disabled peers have that opportunity. And it's a huge inequity that the only way you can receive specialized instruction over the summer in DC is through ESY. Now, ESY is different than summer school. It is generally non-credit bearing, and it's designed strictly to look at goals that students have on their IEP. So that is one real space. Another place where parents can be supported and families can be supported is to provide them with some certainty. That plan that Elizabeth mentioned, whatever you're going to call it, jurisdictions have different names for it. Some people call it a remote IEP implementation plan or a distance learning IEP plan. But that plan gives families some certainty. And again, I want to reiterate that the parent training opportunity that is available on the IEP is woefully underutilized. IDEA specifically allows school districts to put on IEPs opportunities for parents to receive training and support. If we're going to be doing distance learning with any degree of regularity, that is an important thing to add for our students with disabilities. And then I do want to highlight something that Molly said that I think is very important. When she talked about eligibility and entitlement, just to be clear, a lot of our students are no longer eligible for specialized instruction once they turn 22. One opportunity that might make a lot of sense for some of our students is to extend that eligibility for 6 months or a year, especially for our students who have who are missing out on important transition service activities, job placement opportunities. I'm sure you all know the unemployment rate for students with disabilities is huge. So these, structured employment opportunities towards the end of their time in public education are really important. So extending that eligibility, extending that entitlement to 23 or 24 could be really, really big for a lot of our students. I'll let Ms. Banner go next.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. Caitlin Banner from the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So I I was going to say some of the same things as Maria, one of them being about the parent training opportunities. And I just want to be clear that, we've talked about it some as the opportunity to train parents on digital access and technology access. It's much broader than that. It's not just about training parents on how to engage with the technology that their children might need to access their education, but to train them on how to help deliver the services, how to deliver the different types of therapies, how to not to become a therapist, but to support maybe a digital therapy or a remote opportunity. So I think that is really underutilized and is something that we can take advantage of. The other thing, and I think a theme of everything we're saying, is the ability to think maybe creatively and a little bit outside of our standard service delivery model. But as things are starting to open back up, for families who, for whatever reason, may not be able to medically send their child back to school because of the child's disability, because of the high risk factors in the home, they can start receiving different types of services in the home at that point. I know we were talking before about one-on-one aids or different types of therapies that right now, because of the situation with the pandemic, there's restrictions on people going to the homes to provide those services, but there really is an option as things start to open up to push some of those services into the home for students to work with the parents to support and to implement those, and not to leave everything as just distance learning in one box and in school buildings as another box. There's sort of this middle ground that I think we're going to need to be really thoughtful on, and that we're going to need really strong guidance from OSSE about how LEAs might be able to think about that and implement it.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Thank you all for joining. I had a question. Well, I had two questions. One is more of a clarification. In your recommendation document, you talk about the need for there to be a comprehensive list of school liaisons. Is it that doesn't exist in general, or that OSSE should make that information available? Because it is my understanding that information is available, and I've been over here for the last 10 minutes trying to find it, which might be part of the problem.
That's the answer, is that yes, of course they have that information, but it's not readily available and it's not readily updated. I actually get the information for charters by FOIA-ing Public Charter School Board, which they turn it around pretty fast, but then OSSE, says, oh, can I look at it? Because, they don't, so it's their data collection and their transparency of having it on, websites and everything else. At least that's my opinion. Maybe my colleagues will disagree.
Fascinating. Yeah, I was texting some school leaders and they were like, yeah, we include that information in our annual reports. And so that is an easy fix, I think. Something I wanted to get you to weigh in on was, like, what support or advice might we be able to provide to families who are having a hard time during distance learning? Also, in your recommendations, you talk about how some parents of special needs students are being excluded from receiving printed packets. We know that many of our students and families are not receiving the services that they are entitled to. And so what can we advise parents to do to further their rights during distance learning as schools come back online?
So I'm going to exercise some prerogative and jump in there, because this is what AJE is created to do. And I'm going to say there's really two things I want families to think about. One is tracking. Keep track of what's happening. That's going to be huge, especially because, as everyone's mentioned, it's been pretty transparent that there's going to be a conversation for a lot of families around compensatory or missed services. So that tracking part and knowing what you're getting and what you're not getting is huge. And then also to talk a little bit about what Molly and Elizabeth both mentioned, parents sometimes are literally not talking to the right person at the school. And that's not their fault. They don't know who the right person at the school is. So facilitating that communication is huge. Of course, AJE is still open. We're the federally designated Parent Training and Information Center. We are happy to talk to parents and problem solve. We've actually been fairly successful in terms of reaching families and coming to some solutions with schools right now in the intermediate. period. But the reality is that a lot of our kids are going to get, as much as they can and as best as they can, but it's not going to be enough. That's where that data collection comes in, is really important.
And it certainly wouldn't replace the need for OSSE to collect and make public that information. But I'm also thinking, hearing you speak about that might be a function that the state board can play during this period of distance learning in collecting that information for our schools and making that readily available for families.
And for us.
The other piece of that, this is something that is a hard problem in the summer every time, and we're approaching it as people leave. That is the time when teachers and special ed folks leave, and parents are kind of left out. We have I don't even want to start getting into the busing issue for kids with special ed when we do have schools coming back, because it's just going to be a nightmare. But I think that's why we are so anxious and why we've been sending these letters out so much, because we have to be planning now. We're probably last month on how parents can get in touch. What do we do about IEPs? Where are we? And all of that. And I think Maria will agree, and as a parent myself, 90% of parents can probably get something really useful if they know how to advocate for it. It's not that schools are, we're not going to do anything for our kids, but it's kind of the squeaky wheel gets the oil often. And so the parents who say, I really want some more speech, he's stopped talking, or his expressive language has really gone down, and we've seen it. If they say that to the coordinator or the principal, they'll often get like, well, we can add another speech session this week, and we can build that up, and maybe we can do that in this other place. So a lot of it is really making sure parents know they can ask, and that they're really giving, as Maria often likes to say to parents, make sure you're asking for what you really want. And if you're saying, well, I keep asking for testing, and what you mean is a speech evaluation, you might not get the right thing. So I think AJE is really helpful in making sure that they do that. But I think we're all hoping that maybe the State Board of Ed and your conversations can also put some pressure on OSSE and our other education leaders to ask for these things, because they're not, as you've said, they're not hard to get.
And if I just borrow a little bit more time, 2 extension questions based on what you said, and maybe you all can tag team here. One is, if you had to name off the top 3 or 4 things that would be most critical for families in the immediate month to next 2 months that the state board might be able to help compile, what might those things be? And then connected to that, I think underpinning a lot of your recommendations is this idea that we need to be more transparent in the services that we're providing to families and students. And there's a tension there that in theory and by law, all schools should be servicing and be willing and able to service all students. But we know that that's also not the reality. And so to ask a school to make, or OSSE to make very clear the services that schools provide seems in conflict with the law. And so just like, how do you square like that push on us as the state board or OSSE when it seems to be counter to the law that all schools should be servicing all students? And then I'm done. So
no, I love that question. And I think that one thing that OSSE has done, and that the Office of Special Education Programs has done, on the federal level, is communicated this notion of not so much grace, but the reality of the fact that there is going to be a gap. And we need to acknowledge it, own it, and address it. I hear you completely that there is a real tension, that you are supposed to implement these IEPs, you are supposed to provide FAPE. And then for many of our kids, what they are actually receiving is very far away from FAPE. I think that one thing that OSSE has, I think, tried to do, and that I would argue that the federal office has done a little bit of a better job of, is telling schools that there's going to be that gap and you're going to have to work to address it. But the myth that you're going to be able to do it perfectly right now is a myth. And if we can accept that, we can operate from a place of transparency, from a place of, where we're looking at outcomes and partnership. If we can accept the fact that there is going to be that gap. OSSE's guidance has helped schools be able to do that. I think one piece that would be very helpful, the PCSB has done a very, very good job of requiring all of the charter schools to create a distance learning plan. Unfortunately, that is not available without a FOIA request if your school doesn't want to give it to you. So encouraging there to be that communication about this is what distance learning looks like here, and pushing it out. When I've asked for it, I've been able to get it. But a lot of parents, don't know that. So I think, encouraging the publication and dissemination of those distance learning plans would be huge. And I hope that answered your question as best as it could be.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes.
Sorry, I'm having technical problems too. So I'm talking through my phone, but I can see you all, and I think you can see me too. I have sort of two questions. One is when I think about like the stratification and like the tiers, right? Like it's like we have our students with disabilities who are receiving support during COVID, not everything that's in their IEP, but they're receiving something. Then we have our students with disabilities who really aren't receiving much of anything. Then we have our students who are suspected of having a disability, but they weren't able to get testing done prior to COVID. Then we've got our Tier 3 RTI students who in many cases also aren't receiving any support. And when we use that language and the language around like the gap, I mean, how do we, yes, include all of our SPED students in that gap, but also look at those students who were teetering on the edge? In the gap.
So I'm going to let Elizabeth start, and then I suspect I'll finish it because she's very good at talking about our shortage.
Yeah, so I think that you're right. The gap, I mean, starting from the bottom up, the students who are teetering and they're getting those intervention services in the classroom, but perhaps haven't been tested. We're going to really need to ramp up the ability for schools to evaluate these students. And that's just going to mean hiring more staff to be able to complete the evaluations, really making sure that the school teams can be available during the summer months to actually review the information and put together the IEPs. So, really focusing on kind of staffing up so that we can get students evaluated as quickly as possible. And we know even for our youngest students, right, that, would have normally been referred for early intervention services, for example, by pediatricians. We know that so few children are going in for well child visits, whether that be because they're afraid of contracting COVID or because practices aren't even open yet. And so that's another area where we're really missing these critical screening opportunities to get kids connected to services. So I 100% agree with you. That is one specific type of gap that we can address by, making sure that as things return to normal, that we can really get these evaluation services up and running and in place as quickly as possible. In terms of the other students who are looking at, whether they're getting some services or some services, kind of plus or not being able to engage in services at all, I think it's going to be critical to figure out how are we going to be doing some benchmarking with these students to kind of get these accurate measures of what regression looks like, more than just they missed X numbers of hours of instruction in A, B, and C, right? So let Maria jump in if she wants.
I think, and I think we've talked a lot about this with the board in the past around the context of the dyslexia legislation. There is a huge problem in terms of how we do responsive to intervention in the district and how we make sure we're providing quality, appropriate instruction from the get-go anyway, which is candidly why sometimes our special education numbers are as high as they are, because there's real questions about the appropriateness of some of the interventions and the instruction that we're providing from the beginning. So I think looking at that holistically and really looking at, again, the benchmarking, but the quality of the instruction and the quality of the interventions the students are receiving early is important. And that's something that you all can have energy around. For me, as someone who tries to advocate on an individual level for individual students, in addition to advocating systemically, sometimes what that means for me is I'm pushing for evaluations for kids who may not who may, you know, otherwise be appropriately served in RTI, but I don't trust the RTI process in many LEAs. So we're pushing for evaluations earlier. And that's a tension, you know, and that's a sign of the system not working as it should.
And this is Caitlin. Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
I had another question. So go ahead, Caitlin, why don't you go ahead and answer?
Sure. This is just a short add-on to what both Maria and Elizabeth were saying, which is just that I think that making sure schools are ready to hit the ground really running. I mean, we know it's going to feel overwhelming to get back to school at all and to get these services up and running. But we need to equip LEAs with the ability to do those evaluations, do those RTI interventions from the get-go. It can't be that when a student comes back to school, there's a 3-month lag between even considering if they're eligible to keep receiving these RTI services. And we know that that delay, it's hard. And I have a lot of sympathy for how hard it's going to be for everyone to come back. But I think that we need to provide whatever supports and plan whatever supports in now that we can, so that those delays are minimized as much as possible to prevent even further slide and regression.
May I ask one more question? Okay. So when we're talking about regression and outcomes, can you clarify if that is based off of the individual student or if it's just based off of the individual student relative to the class or the school performance? And this is like in relation to compensatory education services.
So the READ standard for compensatory education or missed services is that we want to put the student in the place that they would have been but for the denial of faith, right? So that would be where we think the student would have been, you know, so it's an individualized determination in that sense. However, one of the things where it does become relative is where we remember the fact that all IEPs, or the overwhelming majority of IEPs, like 94% of our IEPs, should be looking to bring students to grade level, which means that, you know, for most of our special education students, they should be making more than 1 year's progress during a calendar year, because that's why special education is special, because you are making more progress because you are behind. And the goal of specialized instruction is to get you to grade level, which is what makes it special. So we're looking at the individual student's benchmark, but we're always keeping in mind the larger goal of getting them to grade level. And I realize that's a kind of a non-answer in a lot of ways, but that is the READ standard, and that's kind of the tension. That helps.
It helps, and you know, I have concerns that some schools will say, hey, actually most of our students didn't make that much progress during this time period. So, you know, maybe you wouldn't qualify for compensatory education services. And I think that brings up an entirely, an even broader equity issue, right? So for schools who were maybe lacked a lot of resources during this distance learning period and just really weren't able to provide the kind of education that other schools are able to provide, that would ostensibly mean that those SPED students would be less likely to be entitled to comp ed, and that's scary.
It is, but I would say that it is scary. And I don't think that any of us here have an easy answer to that. But I do want to flag that doing a poor job of providing general instruction and being in a quote unquote low performing school doesn't change what the READ standard is and doesn't change the legal obligation to the individual child. I've sat at many an IEP table where I say my client is 3 years behind, this is unacceptable. And the response I get is, well, every student is 3 years behind, so your student doesn't have a disability. Mm-hmm. That's not relevant in that conversation at that moment. It is in reality and what you're doing, and when I'm thinking with my policy hat on, it's very much relevant. But in that moment for that child, when I'm making a plan, it's not.
Thank you.
Just to add on to that, I mean, I agree completely with everything, as I always do, that Maria said. But I think also that we have to remember that I think it's true that there are going to be some students generally that have fallen behind during this time period. I think that's a reality that we're all acknowledging and facing right now, special education or general education students. But presumably when those students come back to school, there's going to be plans in place to try to get those students caught up and back onto grade level that are going to need to look different for special education students. And so it's a conversation about compensatory education missed services on one hand, but it's also about what is the school doing currently to serve those students where they are for all of our students. So I think that some of that may help to ameliorate the concerns that you're bringing up, right? That there's sort of two bites at the apple. It's both compensatory education, but it's also designing the new education plan to help get that student where they need to be on grade level. And I think that's going to be a conversation that's system-wide, not just for students with disabilities, but students with disabilities can also benefit from that and may be able to have will have individualized plans that help to address how the schools are going to help them get caught up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us. I think, maybe building on the previous conversation about, protecting the rights of our students, would you have any helpful tips both for us as policymakers and community leaders, but also for our families about how we best help our families navigate through the complaint process during this time? So, obviously providing FAPE is like much more difficult in this climate, but some things are just going to be egregious, and like families still need the right to complain and get their issues rectified. So during this time and as we transition back, do you have any tips on how to navigate the complaint process?
Well, it's important to note that the complaint process for both state complaints and individual due process complaints is still up and running. So that is still available to families. Generally we recommend that folks not look at due process without talking to counsel because that's a legally significant activity. State complaints are much more accessible to a lot of families, but both those offices are still up and running. For students who have 504 plans, they've got far fewer protections and complaint dispute resolution options, but those offices are still up and running. I know that, Dan and Serena are both up and working. We're working and still taking intakes and still taking a lot of intakes. And I know CLC is too. So we are all here and still available. Government is still working. So the complaint resolution process is still happening. I think right now, though, I would advise families to really think about creative dispute resolution options, just kind of generally. People are generally happier when they go through mediation or when they work with the ombudsmans than they are when they go through direct litigation. So that's always something to keep in mind.
Thanks, that's helpful.
President Wattenberg.
Hi, thanks again for coming. It's been terrifically helpful and informative. I have a question. I want to go back to a learning question that you started with and then take it back to what are we going to do this summer? It seems to me that some students are learning very effectively through the distance learning. We just had a conversation with some of our students who are in AP classes and they love it. And then there's some students for whom it is particularly difficult. So my question to you is, as we head into summer and as we head into a fall and we don't know what, to what extent would you say, thinking that, students with IEPs, it's such a range of students, right? And some, as you pointed out, have specific health issues that really prevent them from using the school. But apart from that, would you say that a push to get students who really have a hard time learning through distance learning, a push to get them to be sort of the first in line for summer school, the first in line for in-person education come the fall. Is that something that you would look at as a really important thing to be thinking about, or is that one among many?
AJE, as a rule, is a fan of any policy that empowers parents to make choices that are good for their kids. So I think to the extent that families have options, and they're real options, that could be a worthwhile place to put energy. I'm, as I often do, thinking about my own life. I've got one kiddo who's flying fabulously with distance learning, and another one for whom I think he thinks this is a form of torture. Invented just for him. Yes, he thinks it's torture invented just for him. And if I could get him in a building before her, I would. So I think that might be worthwhile, especially as Elizabeth mentioned, there are going to be families who don't want to send their child back and would prefer to wait because of their child's health issues or their family health issues. And then there are going to be other families who are extremely anxious to return the child to school. What do you all think? I know I'm just kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. You know, helping to meet families where they are and offering them a variety of solutions, I think is going to be critical, especially as we hear that, you know, we may all go back to school. There may be a resurgence. We may need to switch back to distance learning. I know that that's something that, you know, I've heard other jurisdictions kind of contemplating. So really being able to offer people, you know, the options to choose what's best for them and their family, I think will be, you know, best, especially for students with disabilities. And it will also kind of help us stay limber, right? And be able to make that pivot so that it won't be so clumsy to go from one kind of modality to the other if we need to transition in the future.
Yeah, this is Caitlin. I want to sort of emphasize the need to make sure that people do have a choice, because I think it's going to be very hard to identify. I don't know if there's an objective criteria you can apply to say these kids, this group of kids does better with distance learning and this group of kids does better with in-person learning. I think it's going to be because it's not just a question about the kid's learning disability, it's a question about the family situation and what's needed in terms of who in the family is at risk, who in the family is working and needs childcare, who has younger siblings who are sick, right? There's like a million, as you all know, there's a lot of factors that affect a student's ability to get to the classroom before the global pandemic, right? And that this is only complicated by that. So to the extent that students can have those choices and families can figure out what is going to best serve them, I think is helpful. I think trying to separate it out by some artificial category is going to be really challenging, especially as we're all adjusting to whatever the new reality looks like.
All right. I am going to close it up. Do any of you have final things that you want to say before I do a little closing here?
We didn't respond to something Mr. O'Leary had asked about, which is the number of students who've been served. And we're not in a position to answer that directly, but I would direct you to the PCSB has an excellent document that they put out with the number of students who haven't been touched or have had no contact. And they break it down by special education status versus not special education status, along with some other factors. I was looking to see if I could find it. I couldn't find it. I'm sure if you guys ask, the PCSB would be delighted to share it. That might answer some of Mr. O'Leary's questions. But there was one thing I found heartening about that document, which is that special education students are actually contacted more. They're more in contact than their non-disabled peers, which makes me happy and I think shows the potential promise of IDEA as a real tool.
I would just like to thank you all for this fabulously informative session. And I want to steal the phrase, the new reality, because that's what we're looking at. Not the new normal, but the new reality. Thank you all so much.
And Madam President, if I could just very quickly, Maria and team, I would love to follow up and offer on behalf of the board. And so it being our working session, between now and our public meeting, for us to compile a lot of this information that you're saying is not readily available for parents. If board members are willing to lend some capacity and working with our ombudsman, I think we could probably make some of that available by the end of this month. And so if you could share your contact information if we don't already have it, and I'm sure John Paul does, I would love to coordinate that with you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you guys. And please consider us a resource if you have any questions or if we can provide you with any follow-up information. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'm not sure if this is repeating what Mr. Parker is saying or slightly different, which is I also thought coming out of this that we could try to compile into a letter or a resolution some of the particular issues that are really important to be dealt with. The idea that we need to pull together sort of the best examples. I mean, I thought that was such an interesting way that I guess it was Maria who talked about it first, that there are these good things going on. We have to catalog them and get them around, that idea, and so on. So Zachary, is that the same as what you're saying? You're talking about a contact list, or you're talking about, we're on the same page?
I think we're along the same lines.
All right.
Not a contact list.
What?
Not a contact list, but just compiling information to make it centrally available to families.
Well, and also, okay, so information for families, but also information, but also to compile the issues that we would like for OSSE to deal with or other folks in the education space to deal with.
Okay, yeah, well, then we're not along the same lines. So just to be
clear, two different things.
Yes, I was thinking about how can we be a lift to families during this time and make the information available in one place that is available to us.
Right. So I think we're talking about potentially two things, which we will take a look at and talk to you about. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much
for having us.
Okay. John Paul.
Members, one of the other things that we had talked about doing was potentially asking, looking at some small questions, a set of survey questions that we could form to parents related to this work that we've been talking about on distance learning, that we've been learning from you and from discussions with the Student Advisory Committee and others. We had put together some information and wanted to run it by you, whether or not it's actually a good idea to think about devoting some staff time and board time, frankly, in getting these survey questions out to folks within the next few weeks, so that we can compile the information, have it ready, so that it's usable for the mayor and for others as they're making the decision makings through the budget process as well. Ruth, I don't know how much context you want to give related to what we're talking about on the survey or not.
Well, I think we were talking about the extent to, how should we try to be helpful in this setting and contribute. And one of the ideas was around a survey, and then I think John Paul had sort of talked about focusing it on, and Marcus on, to focus it on parents, to focus it on specific groups and specific issues. I mean, and then I'll just say, and one of the questions though is at this point, there are a lot of surveys in the field. What can we add? What's our value add? I think is really the question. And I think John Paul had some ideas about how to frame it. And then the question for us is the extent to which we're in positions to get this out to people who haven't done it before. And so it's a value add. That's really the question.
Yeah, the idea is thank you, Ruth. The idea is not to replicate, right? We don't want to do the same thing that some of the other groups are doing. But we do think that in any survey that you do, once you get the responses, there are always questions that you sort of wish you asked, or ones that you wish you could delve a little bit further, that are relevant to what our work is, especially for those communities that are regularly ignored by these sort of survey tools, whether or not you're putting them out on social media or whatever. You know, the goal of a survey for us, I think, really should be to try to target the groups of folks that are not heard very often. So we talked specifically about special ed community, the ELL community, the homeless community, groups that we know and have contacts with, and can do our best to get survey material out to them in a way that is you know, something that other folks aren't able to do. And that's really working on using the resources of you as board members in your communities to really get out to folks that that aren't touched very often in these types of discussions, but that their input is desperately needed when we're talking about reopening DC and also talking about how we're going to move forward. As Dr. O'Leary said earlier, in the new reality, we need to know what they think in order to make those decisions. And so that's the sort of concept idea. We haven't thought much about what the questions would be and things yet. I am starting to be in touch with the folks who I know who have already done surveys to ask specifically those questions. You know, what would you ask now that you've had your survey done? What questions do you wish you had asked? So that we can compile something that's really useful beyond just our work. But we wanted to gauge the board on whether or not that's something of interest before we spend a whole lot of time developing it.
I think also part of what we talked about was the board would, you know, board members would need to come forward as well with examples of questions that we really wanted answered based on what we're hearing from our communities, as well as with sort of the time and contact information to sort of reach out to folks in a pretty serious way. That's really the questions. I'm seeing some nods. All right. So I think we'll get back out to you about how much people feel invested in being able to pull this together and go forward from there. Sound right?
Ruth, can I just follow up with a quick question?
Yes.
One thing I wonder about is if we try to cover the landscape of everything all of our constituents might care about, I do think we'll lose some of those target populations John Paul mentioned that we might want to focus on.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's exactly. No, that's the idea.
Right, but so that's my point, is that I would like us to focus on those more narrow groups rather than all the things all our constituents might care about. And I know that is complicated. I know that involves trade-offs for us in our wards. But I do worry that if we were to focus on sort of a broad set of questions and then some specific groups, the specific group responses might get lost amidst the noise of a full-scale survey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think we're all on the same page. What I would is, but we need input from people on the board on how to reach those groups of students and what are the kinds of questions that we're hearing from those families. That's the.
Got it.
Does that clarify?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I am moving.
Can I just ask
Yes.
Sorry. Process question on that. When and how are you is there going to be a reach out about that? Are we going to get an email? Like, yeah, how are we planning to do that?
Yeah, I'll send an email after this meeting with specific requests from board members about sort of how to input potential questions and what groups we should target. Thank you, Emily. Great question.
All right. That brings us to the environmental learning plan and Emily. And let me just say we're 17 minutes past where we are. But we still have over an hour of time. So we have environmental learning and then committee reports. So I think we're fine, but keep that in mind.
I'm keeping in mind. All right. I'm going to share my screen. And I don't know what you'll see first, but wait, it says we'd like to record this, deny. Okay. Sorry, hold on one sec. Um, hmm. I'm having technical difficulty. I might have to,
What is it that you're trying to share? Maybe.
doesn't seem to, it's just a PowerPoint on my desktop. So maybe I could,
Emily, we're losing
Just
you.
as
I don't know
hard-
if you can tell.
seeing it. I can try. Maybe that's the problem. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Is this better?
Yes. I think if you
Can
do
you hear me?
share content, it should be able to pick the PowerPoint.
Share content?
I believe so.
It's not, okay, hold on, sorry.
Just FYI, my share content is closed off. Yours might be as well, Emily.
It's only letting me share, well, it's not letting me share anything, but the only thing that shows up is is my online window and not my desktop. Oh wait. Yeah, it's not, it says we can't display your shared content. Make sure that you've allowed permission to share. So I don't have permission.
If you can send me the document, I can share it.
All right, I will share it. Trying to think if is there something else that somebody could talk about while I'm doing this? I feel bad.
Ruth, you're on mute.
Could we go on to the student advisory committee while we wait for Emily?
That's a good idea.
Is the student advisory?
Alex?
Yeah. So for the student advisory committee, we had a meeting this past Monday, and Emily and Ruth were both there. Thank you to all the board members who shared the survey, one of the surveys for the student advisory committee that I shared with you guys. Gotten a lot of responses so far. We plan to finish collecting survey data the week after APs are done, and then we're gonna have a meeting on Tuesday, May 26th, I think, and we're going to discuss the report that we'll be starting after we finish collecting information, and then after Ruth suggested something writing about the coronavirus and how we think in the future distance learning next semester in the fall should take place. We discussed that will probably be on the report as well, and we had some suggestions for how we think that would best work going into next year, but so far we are collecting responses for the survey. And then once we finish that, we'll be working on the report for productivity in the classroom, and then for Deja's post-secondary preparation. And then also the third added part about distance learning and how we think that'll best be done. So yeah.
Great. Can I ask a quick question, Alex?
Yeah.
So I did have a somebody reach back out to me and ask a clarifying question about the survey and whether the teacher is meant, like, are they supposed to choose one teacher, or is it sort of thinking about their teachers generally?
It would be like generally. So if the overwhelming majority of your teachers, the students' teachers, like fail to do something, then you would probably like say disagree. And if it's like and if every teacher does it horribly strongly disagree, I'd say probably just use your judgment. If you think that it's like somewhat in the middle, then or falls towards disagree or agree, but it's generally encompassing all.
In general. Okay, thank you.
Alex, I think that the students' responses to the whole distance learning piece and to the virus itself will be a very, very important document that we can use.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to thank Ruth. I think that was your idea. Meeting on Monday, and we're definitely looking forward to doing so, and we're going to make sure that we can do the best we can to make sure that in the future distance learning will happen in the way that'll be best for students, because I know something we talked about was like having a uniform plan or like structure for where the classes, where the assignments are being collected, like one platform. So for some schools like mine, it's been Microsoft Teams. And we think that's pretty important, that there's one singular platform being used so there's not added confusion.
Yeah, the ideas were great. There was a lot of them.
And one of the reasons is that distance learning now is really sort of reviews and things like that. But distance learning, if the virus goes back up or whatever, when schools finally open, it's going to be a completely different thing, because it's going to have to do with credit, with gaining credit. And the students now are just sort of treading water as far as credit. They've already, their grades are going to be based on what they did the first 3 advisories, and they can up their grades, but their grades can't go down. So when they start the new year, it's going to be a whole different concept as far as distance learning.
All right, thank you very much. Alex, all right. Emily, are you ready, or should we go to Fraser to do, whoops, oh, there it goes, okay.
Oh, cool. All right, thanks, John Paul. So, oh geez, what's happening? So as I have mentioned since February, I've been working, or I've been part of the OSSE Environmental Literacy Plan Working Group. And the primary focus is on revising the objectives and goals. And so I wanted to just give you a little bit of background on what this is. It's, been around since 2012. It was in response to the Healthy Schools Act, which was passed in 2010. And it's really intended to ensure that all of our students across sectors are graduating with a strong sense of environmental literacy. And here it's defined as knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to make informed decisions concerning the relationships among natural and urban systems. And I'm not going to read the rest of this, but it's in the report. And I did send that in an email. So if you're interested, you can look at more. Can you go to the next slide? So I don't know why that other thing isn't. Can you click again? See if that, okay. Well, this is, there's a pilot program in 8 schools, 4 charters, 4 DCPS schools that was started in 2013, I believe. There's supposed to be a little box there, but, and so the plan has been implemented in these 8 schools. So you can see there's 1 in each ward. I don't know where that just went, but there's interest obviously in expanding this. And I think, as I mentioned in my email, one of the main issues that we've discussed is how to make this something that schools want to do, feel like they have the resources and the support to do. Is this something that should be incentivized in some way? Are there ways to assess it that would make it more likely that schools would do it. So it's really sort of grappling with how do you make this happen, right? Can you go to the next slide? And the next one. Oh, I must have sent you an old copy. Sorry. Go to the next one. Oh, shoot, that's the problem. All right. As you can see, these are partners, and we are there. But go to the next slide. When you look at, this is from the plan itself, we are not really listed as taking any initiative in any of the actual actions. And so the SBOE has not played an active role with this, whereas the other partners have. And so the reason I'm bringing this to you is because I've been asked basically by OSSE if, there are portions of this that the State Board of Education would be interested in taking a more active role in. Can you go to the next slide? So I'm not allowed, unfortunately, to share the whole document we're working with you, but I am sharing, this is one area where I thought that perhaps we might take a more active role. And so, as you can see, the overall goal is for all students to graduate with the knowledge that, the overall goal, right, that I read earlier. But the objective is a student objective that all students engage in project-based experiences at every grade level, both in the classroom and outdoors, designed to increase understanding of environmental and sustainable concepts. And then the overarching sort of concept here is to identify existing programs of study in high schools that integrate environmental literacy components that lead to proficiency in environmental literacy. So if the red font is the area where I think we might be helpful, and that would be to sort of be part of the conversations of what the role of the next generation science standards would be in making this more robust. And so what it says here is, are there changes we should make that would encourage pursuit of those concepts? And so that's an area that, it's a small comment, but it would require sort of the SBOE, some members, to take this on and work with OSSE on looking at the NGSS, standards and seeing if there are areas where we would want to make changes. So that is one. And then any questions or thoughts before I go on? Okay, next one. So the other one is an educator objective, and it's really about supporting educators. And so the strategy is provide educators with environmental literacy instructional resources aligned with current standards. And this action item is to create a crosswalk document that identifies early learning standards that include environmental literacy concepts. And so I put us there, and it just asked the question of whether we should actually revisit the environmental literacy concepts in those standards. So again, that would involve, considerable input. So those were the two main areas. They have been really careful to avoid talking about changing standards or graduation requirements. And so that's just another broader question of whether this is something we would be interested in taking on and really looking at with them. Yeah.
Question. In terms of the crosswalk, would this be a resource for just those schools that are partnered with this initiative, or would this be something that we would likely promote with all schools across DC?
They're trying to expand it to all schools, and that's what they're grappling with. They don't really know how to make it real. You know what I mean? So right now there's a plan and it sounds great, but they know that without oversight, and since it's, not something that is part of the report card, it's not, emphasized, that there's not really a good way to even know whether or not it's being implemented or to what extent and what the quality is. Right now, those 8 schools are receiving really direct support and partnership. And so, there's been talk of using those schools obviously as models, and making that part of the process. But I think that the state board could have a role. It just seems like a natural place for us to come in and sort of be thinking, at least thought partners, if not more active in, I think they're avoiding making those changes, like talking about change, could we have a graduation requirement? That would require our input. And unless we're willing to jump in, I don't think we can recommend that, right?
Yeah, no, hearing you discuss that, a few thoughts. One, I think it's just a great opportunity to partner with OSSE, especially as you pointed out that we're the only agency that hasn't really leaned in here. So I think it's something we should definitely do. And I think it dovetails nicely with our well-rounded education work in a way that we could, if the committee were to undertake this, understanding that we've already come up with goals, but we can always revamp them. But if we were to undertake this, I think it could be a lens through which to also analyze which schools and how schools are providing students access to courses and content that might lend itself to these environmental literacy concepts. So I'm seeing a connection there. And I think it's a good idea overall.
Absolutely. And, I agree with you 100% about the connection with the well-rounded education work that we're already doing. And that is actually another question that they had asked was, how does, or what aspects of this plan align with work you're already doing or that you're planning to do in the future? And so that's immediately what came to mind for me. Does anybody else have thoughts or questions either way on this? Like, does this seem like something that would make sense to include in the work that we're doing?
This is Jessica. I'll chime in. I think the crosswalk, since it goes with the early learning standards, would be interesting for the well-rounded education committee. One of the things we initially talked about with that committee was focusing on the younger grades, but also focusing on more content-rich, knowledge-rich content for the early grades. And so this notion, I think, would nicely fit with that. And I would be supportive of putting this piece of the work in the well-rounded education committee. Makes sense to me.
Great. Thank you.
Can I just say, I don't think either John Paul or I can see the hands going up, so people should just jump in because nobody can see who to call on.
Okay.
Okay. If nobody else has other thoughts or questions, can you go to the next slide? I think actually that's it. Yeah, because the other questions are just, how does this align with our work and what are we planning to do in the future? And so, as I said, I mean, the well-rounded education committee seems like an obvious fit. I didn't know if there were other areas where people saw, but if not, that's my spiel.
And I also weigh in on behalf of the well-rounded, talking about it and seeing where we can fit in.
Great, thanks.
Okay, moving along. Fraser, you're going to give a report on where we are on retention?
I will attempt to do that. all of you should have a document that was sent to you, a resolution of, it's not a resolution, it's a resolution in progress resolution. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's rather lengthy, and we probably don't want it to be as lengthy as it is. But I need to get, I would like to have you all take a look at it and to get some feedback about the resolution itself by next Tuesday. If anyone can't do it by Tuesday, can you let me know? But I'd like to do a good read of it and see what you like about it and what you don't like about it, and see what you think we can add or subtract to that. And I'd like to have all that information by next Tuesday, because we'd like to put this resolution in front of the board at our public meeting. Okay? But what I'd like to, I'm sorry, someone said something. Is that okay? All right, I don't see anybody
Yeah.
following or anything. Okay, good. I don't see everybody on my screen anyway. So you know that we have the report. The report has gone out. We're going to be working on when we're going to get the report more publicity. I don't think this is the time for that. We're going to get it to all of our council members right away, and I'd like you to get it to as many people in your community as possible. But what we're looking at now is what are the next steps for the Teacher Retention Committee, and I want to list just a couple of things that I think are very important. It's very important that professional development is emphasized by us in the new world. It's very important that DCPS has said that they're going to do research on the impact and look at what works and what doesn't work. We need to keep our foot on the pedal about that, so that when DCPS, because they've said that, the chancellor mentioned that in his response to the report, which was that some of the stuff wasn't what should have been, but that was his response. But he also did mention that they're looking into impact and to making changes, and I think we need to keep the pressure on them to do that. And the other thing is I would like for us to work on getting information from all of the LEAs about the attrition that they had in 2019 and 2020. The LEAs should know they're hiring teachers now, so they know who's leaving, and it'd be helpful for us to find that out. John Paul, can you see everybody? If you can, I see hands going. I think Ashley raised her hand. Ashley?
Yeah, I would completely disagree about putting any type of pressure on anyone about the change of impact. We put out information from a survey. That does not mean that we are taking a position on that. Furthermore, we have received word time and time and time again from several principals on how much they enjoy impact. And it is not our duty as a board to put forth any type of recommendation to change impact or put pressure on anyone, as you would say, French.
That's not what I was saying, Ashley.
You said that we need to put pressure on. I do not believe we should do that.
The chancellor said that they're going to look into changing the impact.
That's what they said in the letter that they sent back
to us,
which I appreciated at our public board meeting.
That's all I'm saying, is that we need to hold them to what they said. That's all. I'm not saying it's anything official at all.
Looking into and changing are two different things, and they might be able to make minor changes, but we should never I do not believe it is our best interest to tell DCPS that they should change their
That's not what I said.
teacher evaluation system.
I'm not saying that at all. I agree with you. It's not in our purview. I'm saying that the chancellor said that they're going to look into changing, and he needs to be held accountable for the looking into. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Parker?
Yes, thanks, Frazier. As I mentioned in the comment, I'm not sure where this resolution came from or who drafted it, but it doesn't reflect what was discussed in our committee meeting in terms of what the needs are for our district or city to improve teacher retention and, more importantly, student outcomes. As I read through everything that comes after, therefore, be it resolved, it's anchored in paid family leave. The only thing that stands out to me that seems relevant to student learning, and another thing that was highlighted, was the racial representation, namely of Black and Latinx teachers, which I don't see represented anywhere in this resolution, is the professional development aspect, which I support. And so I guess my question was, to what extent do you want feedback? Because where I stand now, I would want to rip this resolution up and start from scratch. So that's one question. And I just want to go on record to say that I think our place of providing a resolution to accompany our report and video is, one, to let the report and video speak for itself, but then two, offer recommendations for how the district might advance the work here. Like the connection to paid family leave, regardless of how you feel about it politically, I, for one, personally, in my personal politics, support paid family leave. It has nothing to do with what's echoed in the report or the video, and I have no idea where that recommendation even came from. So,
Zach, that's why I asked for.
I'm not attacking you, Frazier.
I'm just saying. That's why.
I know we had a spirited, not you and I, but the committee had a spirited committee meeting, and I'm just concerned that what was discussed there is not reflected in this resolution.
That's why I want everyone to chime in, Zachary. I agree with you.
So just to clarify, to what extent do you want feedback? Is it like just provide recommendations, or are you open to the board grabbing time to kind of like build from scratch, which is what I would perhaps recommend?
I'm saying I'd like any kind of recommendations.
Cool.
Anybody else, John Paul?
Just to clarify, recommendations in by Tuesday, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be, today's the 6th. That would be the 12th, I guess.
And I
want to have questions.
My apologies, John Paul and Madam President. I just want to go on record and underscore that in the resolution, it rightly names that the greatest impact of our teacher turnover is in wards 5 and 8. And I want to underscore that part of our discussion was around the need to expand this conversation to retaining teachers of color, in particular, Black and Latinx teachers. And so while I'm not necessarily saying that that needs to be our only or sole recommendation, I would just caution us from using this as an opportunity to further any list of things that we want to further for special interest groups, and really anchor on what is going to be important for students and advancing retention of Black and Latinx teachers. So I just want to underscore that and make that really clear. That should be our main focus.
Thank you, Zachary. I agree completely.
Dr. Sutter?
So I want to build on what Zachary just shared with the group. Alex O'Sullivan and I spent some time last week talking about a potential resolution focused on African American educators. It is my fault. I dropped the ball in us moving it forward any further, but it perhaps is a nice state of affairs that we have this resolution about teacher retention, and a number of things that Alex and I discussed on Thursday were about this issue of retaining and recruiting African American educators. We looked at some of the reports that I had shared with Emily during her Latinx educator resolution around the sort of tactics that districts and states might take around recruiting and retaining teachers of color. And so what I will agree to do before Tuesday is to take some of the feedback that Alex and I put together in our initial draft of a resolution and put that into the comments on this resolution, which I hope will further some of the things that Zachary raised. But I do want to defer to Alex if I failed to say things about our conversation last Thursday or anything else that is on your mind that we ought to be putting in feedback on this. I know he's preparing for AP exams, so I'm happy to take on the mantle of providing any written feedback if that's helpful as well, Alex.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks. I just want to emphasize what you said. I think
Yes, John Paul.
it's an important issue, and I think that we'll continue to work in. I look forward to getting the feedback that you guys may have.
Alex, can you say that again, please?
Yeah. I just said that just to underscore what Jessica said. It's a very important issue to me, and I know some of the benefits that come along with having African American educators and a representative workforce and teachers that really reflect the racial diversity and and really just the makeup of schools, because African American students represent a large portion of our student body, but not a very significant, especially for African American male teachers, not a significant percentage of our teaching force. So it's a pretty important issue, and retaining and recruiting, as Jessica said, and we have some ideas for how we think the city, the state board could go about that, suggestions for improving recruitment.
Thank you, Alex.
President Wattenberg, I think you, Jack, you have questions?
Yeah, just wanted to highlight that I think teacher retention data from the 1920 school year, we're going to have to really think critically about how we try and capture that. Schools are needing to cut budgets. Families are trying to figure out ways to survive, and so sometimes that means moving to another state so you can live with a relative. This whole situation is really going to upend any of this data collection on retention. Yes, some of what we've been working on will certainly be captured, but we're also going to be capturing a lot of individuals who leave the system for a ton of other reasons that have nothing at all to do with the quality of teaching, quality of the schools, students, etc. So I just want to make sure before we really start asking folks for all their information and really digging in, that we're thinking critically about what's really important and make sure that we view this from the needs of the students.
That's a great idea, Jack. I was really just talking about numbers, not about reasons. Just if a school could give numbers, because we have the numbers.
Yeah, but Fraser, even that, I think the numbers of teachers that are leaving the system will likely be higher, and there are just so many things that are out of anybody's control right now. To frame that within the broader discussion about quality teacher retention, I think sort of we're conflating issues that aren't related.
Okay, that's a good point, and that's why I want you to read this thing carefully and add it to it. All right, because this is a huge work in progress. This resolution, and we want everyone's input, and it won't look like this after I get all of the input on Tuesday, then I'll share that with everyone. All right, so that if we can have one by the May meeting, then we do. If we don't have one by the May meeting, then we'll do it in June. Okay, it's going to be the resolution is going to be something hopefully that everyone on the board agrees to.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think to Jack's point, it's an important variable, I think, to identify and to look more closely at, but I know that our work over the past few years around teacher retention has also talked about all of those issues that are, I think, cursory to the education space, but still impact the ability of our educators to remain and work in the communities most in need. And so even when we talk about, right, issues that are acutely impacting communities as it relates to COVID, housing and healthcare, those could, in theory, be reasons that our educators are leaving the workforce, but it also could speak to the lack of supports that we've given those populations, those working class populations in our city, namely our teachers, that I think are maybe more acutely impacting them as a response to the crisis. So I don't want to necessarily negate those factors, but I think it's super important that we hone in on them and see what we could better do specifically as it relates to the teacher workforce to make them better prepared to stay even, as the city hits more economically or socially difficult periods.
I would also just like to add that, I think it's hard to know exactly what we should wade into if it's not directly related to COVID, but I would say that now more than ever, our students and families need stability. And I think, losing teachers is definitely, as we've heard from students, lends to this sense of instability. And I will just add for, Spanish-speaking families in particular, having teachers who they can speak to, whether it's through distance learning or when we return, is going to be huge. It's going to be it's already really important. So I do just want to emphasize that it is a urgent issue right now.
And I'm sorry, and I meant to also underscore, to Zach's point, while like our entire focus shouldn't necessarily be a post-mortem on kind of what's been done. I mean, I think it is important to underscore that there's been a hemorrhaging of Black and brown educators in our city, for the past couple of decades. Just even related to my direct experience, right? I had Black teachers in the classroom consistently until I was in the 4th grade, and still pretty consistently through my matriculation. And so the fact that the inverse is true for Black and brown students in our city today, I think it is a really important area to focus on, and I think a really important fact to keep pinning as we think about this work, not just in recruitment but also in retention.
I also want to highlight too that there is a virtual hiring fair going on right now for teachers. We've posted about it on our social media, and I urge the members to also do so. It's today and tomorrow, and you can register through EdFuel. You can find the information on our social media, but it is a way to make sure that we are hiring good teachers. And we also asked and made sure that there is interpretation services available for teachers that are ELL, as well as making sure that there are some resources available for teachers that need visa assistance. So that is also being provided through the virtual hiring fair. Ruth, I think you had a question. I don't see anybody else.
Oh, actually, Marcus in his first point made the point that I wanted to make, which is we need to know what is going on in terms of retention regardless. It doesn't mean that we have to attribute it to anything, but just like we want to know where students are when they enter school in the fall, because that's important to know. It's not that the school or the teachers or something was bad. We were in a COVID period, but we need to know. So, but the other thing I just want to say is I think the staff made a valiant attempt to try to come back from the discussion yesterday at the retention meeting to have a draft today, simply so that this input could be provided so that a strong draft could come to the May meeting. So I think in that sense, it was very successful. And so I just wanted to say thanks to the staff for doing that, putting it together so quickly, and for the people who came to the retention committee yesterday to talk about it.
So I think we may have, I can't really tell because some members have their hand, but Dr. Sutter, I think you have an additional question.
Sorry, I do. So the one thing I want to just call out from Jack's point, I think given, I heard someone say this yesterday, and I think it's a really helpful analogy for framing this. We're essentially at the second inning of a 9-inning baseball game. we have no idea how the game ends at this point. We don't know what the school year next year is going to look like. So when we talk about retention for next year, I just hope that as a part of our ongoing conversations about this, I think it has less of an impact on the resolution, though maybe. We need to think about what retention even means, because there'll probably be some form of teaching in person and some teaching online. And it may be that it is a separate group of teachers doing one or the other, given health concerns. So just looking at the COVID data in our district, we know that the highest rates of infection have been to African Americans. The highest rates of death have been among our oldest residents. I can't imagine if I were a teacher nearing retirement who was also African American, who maybe also had a pre-existing condition, that I would want to sign up to come back to a building in the fall, just because of the various risk factors I had accumulated and the risk I might put myself in. But I might be willing to teach online. So I just hope that as we think about retention for next year, we think about what schools are using as their definition of who is returning as a full-time teacher, who is being returned as a part-time staff member or some other role. Because my hunch is that we're going to have categories created that we've never had before. And we're going to have ways of thinking about teacher roles and responsibilities that are brand new. And I will echo, I like Fraser's adoption of the new reality is going to give us a lot of new terms and a lot of new definitions. And I just hope that we keep our work at pace with those.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to end it then, Ruth, just by mentioning two things. This has been extremely enervating. I can't wait to read your resolution changes, all right? And I want you to remember one thing about the survey. Remember the survey, that's what started it? The survey showed, that's from TV, I guess. The survey showed that the climate of the school and the impact evaluation were the two main reasons why teachers left the system. All right. And remember that I think it was 85% of the teachers who left said they loved teaching and didn't want to leave, but they left because of those reasons. And what everybody has said has been fabulous. And that will give us a really good resolution, I'm sure. But remember that the impact and the school climate and just whatever you want to talk about. Did they get along with the principal? Did they not like their coworkers? Or did they not feel safe? All of those things that encompass the school climate, those were the reasons why the teachers left. So that's what we on the Teacher Retention Committee, and that's everybody here, that's what we need to work on to try to help to retain teachers in the fall. And Jessica, I couldn't have forced you to do a better job than you just did in putting us into this framework, because we have no idea. DCPS has no idea. The charter schools don't have any idea. The private schools, the parents who have become teachers have no idea what education is going to be like in August, September, October, or November. So what we want to do is to encourage everybody to take part in teaching in the new reality. I'm done.
Thank you. All right, so everybody get your comments into Fraser, and then we'll see where people are not going to be in the same place, and we'll try to work something out. Okay, social studies, Jessica.
Hi there. Between the last social studies committee meeting and tonight, we, being me and the wonderful staff of the state board, pulled together a draft template for the application for our social studies standards advisory committee. So when I last spoke with you at our last working session, we talked about the fact that the board committee was going to come together and talk about who we wanted to invite to be part of our advisory committee. As a reminder, this advisory committee's role is to help the state board evaluate the current standards, look at areas where the standards might need to be updated, revised, added to, expanded upon, and then provide us with a list of guiding principles for how the standards should be reviewed, revised, and updated. We would then adopt those principles and we would give those to OSSE and to their writing committee. So this application is for members of the public who want to join that advisory committee to advise the state board. I can share my screen, but if everyone has a copy of the PDF that John Paul shared earlier this evening, it is going to be easier for you to scroll through it at your leisure than it is going to be for me to scroll through it at a pace that makes sense for all of you. So if you open up the PDF, it's called Draft Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee application. What we're looking for is any feedback from members of the board on the questions we've asked, maybe on the order of the questions, and anything you think is missing. I hope folks had a chance to take a look at it ahead of time. So if anyone has questions or comments now, happy to take them. If you didn't have a chance to look at it ahead of time, we'll go ahead and ask folks to get us those questions and comments by midweek next week. If you got to get Fraser's to him by Tuesday, we'll go with comments on this by Wednesday. So that the goal is we would announce this application is going live at our May meeting. And then we could put it out. We can talk about all the various ways the board wants to help share this application to make sure we get a robust set of applicants for the committee. So first question, feedback on the application and the questions themselves.
I have a nitpicky one.
Go for it. Take it. Nitpick away.
I thought it looked good overall. I stopped at the word employee for, you have parent, student, and then you have school employee. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering about that choice. I mean, I understand that it encompasses everybody in the school, but I don't know. I guess it made me pause. And so I was just wondering about the choice of that and if it might make more sense to say, school leadership and educators or something.
So are you thinking that we need to have more categories so that we can encompass the broad spectrum of who folks might be in the school?
No, like I said, it's nitpicky. And I think it's fine if you want to keep it this way. I was just saying, when you're going through a survey and you kind of, something makes you pause because you're not sure, does this apply to me? Like if I'm a principal, I'm like, am I a school employee? Yes, because there's no other option. Like I might want to scroll through and see is there an option for school leader? It just is not a term that's used a lot. I haven't seen that, to generalize everybody who's in the school, working in the school.
Got it. So would you suggest we change it to, for instance, the first in each list here, we've got DCPS employee. So should it say DCPS school staff, or should it say DCPS educator / leader / staff?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why.
To be more inclusive of the kind of titles folks would have.
Right, more descriptive. So then I'm like, yep, I fit here.
Got it. Thank you. Ruth, you're on mute.
I actually can't look at it right now, but what I wrote down in my notes, and hopefully this was my one and only point, was it talks about, it has several groups. I think it's parents, maybe it's the staff, students, and maybe one other thing. And I thought it should be expanded to include advocates, subject experts, former students, former staff. I mean, I think we want a broader group than, it struck me as very narrow. Those would certainly be the ones we'd be most likely to pick the most of, but I wouldn't want to limit it so much.
So one thing I just want to clarify is that these questions are all in the demographics section. So it's for us to be able to identify how people are self-describing themselves. So we do have in that same section, I am we've got a blank. Please select all that apply. And then we have a not applicable and an other, where folks can actually fill in anything else that we missed.
I see. So it's not exclusive. This is just descriptive and people can put in what they are.
That's right. Because I see your point that adding in things like advocate, former student, et cetera, would, to Emily's point, let people know that like we recognize that people like that might be applying. On the other hand, I worry that if we go beyond sort of a common set of most common categories, we run the risk of being more exclusive by which.
I'm not concerned with having it on the list per se. I was just, I thought it was sort of part of the criteria for selection. So I don't have a problem with that.
No,
If it's just
just
part
the
of
descriptive data on who is applying. And it's at the end of the application after folks have told us why they're interested, what experience they might bring to it, and what involvement they have in K-12 education.
It's fine.
Jack, I saw your hand as well.
Thank you. We had this very similar discussion 4 years ago about the ESSA task force and, creating 15 different categories of members of a committee. And we ran into multiple problems, one of which is, a former student of a charter school didn't apply. And so we left that slot open and we didn't get an applicant for it, let's say. And then if we slotted someone who's a DCSBOE teacher or school leader into an education advocate, then we got criticism for that. So I think if we can just have broad, I think your approach, Jessica, is correct in having these broad swaths about what types of folks are applying. And then certainly we'd want to work, or you'd want to work, to get diversity within that. But if we've gone down this road before where we've been way too over prescriptive as to who we want our committee members to be. And I think the approach you're taking strikes a good balance.
I appreciate that feedback, Jack. I think one thing, just to make my own thinking plain, I'd be really curious to open this application with its descriptive data. And if we say we're leaving it open for a month, to at the 1 week mark, ask our staff for what is the descriptive data of the applicant pool so far, so that we make sure that if we're lacking, for instance, in enough applicants who seem to represent a particular ward of the city, or we don't have any higher ed folks applying, that we can, in week 2, make more, more targeted outreach. Again, not with the notion of filling a quota, but rather making sure that the applicant pool is robust. And Google Forms is really fun for that because you can see the data as it comes in on the back end.
I have one question. This may not be the right place for it, and I'm happy to take it to the committee or somewhere else, which is just how we're going to really push this out. And we have, because we wanted to reach both the audiences we always try to reach, more or less successfully, depending, and also audiences that we don't typically reach out to. So I just want to make sure at some point there's a conversation about that. It does not have to be here.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ruth. What I think makes sense, I got to pull up my calendar here for a second. We next have a social studies committee meeting next week on the 13th. So what I think might make sense to do is to email the entire board to say, do you have suggestions for how we should push this out? Discuss it at the committee meeting next Wednesday, and then be prepared with a plan for rolling that out for when we're able to announce this application goes live at the May meeting. Does that sound reasonable, Ruth?
I think so. Say that one more time. My cat just
ask the whole board for insights on how to roll it out. We can discuss it on the 13th at our social studies committee meeting, and then we can come back with here's our plan in advance of the public meeting.
Good.
Okay. Thank you for raising that, though. I'm making a note for that to be on our agenda for Wednesday. Other thoughts, feedbacks, questions, concerns? Awesome. If you have more questions, concerns, comments, go ahead and email them to me. It would be great if you would email them before Wednesday morning when we have our social studies committee meeting. And I will send a follow-up as a reminder to folks before that so that I can poke you if we need to.
And
Thanks,
beyond the
staff, for putting a
application,
great format together.
sorry about that. I was going to say, and beyond the application, I'm sure our next committee meeting will talk a little bit about like selection and stuff like that as well. So I'll save that. Cool.
Totally. I also have, as a fun highlight for the committee, I have a draft syllabus of what I think the advisory committee might do over its time together. You can take a teacher out of the classroom, but you can't make her stop creating syllabi.
She said syllabus.
I did.
Once I see a rubric come out, then we'll really.
Oh, you just wait. There'll be rubrics too. Thank you all. I appreciate you.
Zachary and Emily? We're well-rounded?
Yes.
Go ahead, Zach.
The Well-Rounded Education Committee met, and we have 3 major updates. The first of which is that we revamped the committee's goals, given the current pandemic and the limited resources we now have as a result. Those goals include, 1, creating a definition of well-rounded education and what that means for the committee as well as the board. Emily and Marcus will be working on that, and you will receive more information most likely by our next working session. Second is creating a list of survey questions that we want to use to gauge system leaders, teachers, and experts around how to best advance well-rounded education. And so we all are working to compile a list of survey questions as well as individuals and organizations that we want to reach out to. Currently on that list includes teachers, Project Zero, for instance, organization by the name of Transcend that's working with Van Ness. And then thirdly, putting together a list of recommendations for schools around how they may expand or advance well-rounded education. And so those are largely at a very high level the goals that we spoke about. And again, you will likely receive updates at our next working session. The 2 other major updates relate to our research projects, one of which was our standards research in partnership with TNTP, which has sadly been halted. To remind you, that research was really investigating the extent to which students were receiving access to grade level instruction at schools across the district, given the limited resources that the board now has as a result of the pandemic. We are now working to explore opportunities to do some of that work for free, which will not allow us to conduct the research at the same scale that we had originally hoped. Ideas now include connecting to our future school visits opportunities for the board to pull student work and then later review student work with stakeholders, as well as working one-on-one with schools that might be willing to engage in some professional learning alongside us to really examine the extent to which students are receiving grade level instruction. Our second research project that has now been interrupted is what we are dubbing our all teacher survey project. What we really wanted to investigate and ask teachers and learn more about the extent to which schools and different programs were providing students a wide range of curricular options and teachers' perspectives on that. And so that work is continuing, but is being adapted. And as I mentioned, we will likely provide updates on all 3 of these things at our upcoming working session. So Emily, anything that I missed or that you would like to elaborate?
I would just say that we actually, as discussed in an earlier meeting around using our equity statement in our working groups, that we actually did that this time. And I thought it was a great way to start the meeting, was connecting what we are already doing to the equity statement and also to the OSSE equity committee recommendations, and to think forward, in that context. So I just would encourage us to continue to do that and for other working groups to do that as well. And then I would just say that adding to what Zach was saying, as we pivot to deal both with the fact that we have lost our funding and also, as Jessica said, I mean, everything that we do now, we have to do it in this new context, right? And so one of the things that we're thinking about is how to conduct research that is less formal, and really thinking about how we can use our positions in our wards to conduct, less, I don't want to say less intensive, but just gathering data from our constituents in a way that it can be used to draw some conclusions. So we're thinking about how to come up with questions that everybody could use perhaps in their wards. And I'll just say that we started by creating some questions for the Student Advisory Committee to answer about well-rounded education during distance learning. So I'm just wondering if members of the Well-Rounded Education Committee could stay a minute after to just talk about a monthly meeting time. We've been having a hard time doing that. Is there anybody who has to jump off immediately?
Fraser and Zach.
You do? No, you don't.
Yes.
All right.
Emily, in this new world, on another board that I'm on, we had a lot of interns that were college students. And I think this would be, especially in DC, would be a really good opportunity to get in touch with the government schools and the law schools in the city to have them do the work for us for credit for the schools, and you can work that in where they get credit, but it would also not cost us anything.
I like that. Thank you, Fraser. Yeah, we can talk more about the logistics of that if we're allowed to do that. But I love the win-win-win solutions, right? If they're getting credit and we're partnering with a university, it's a great idea.
John Paul, is that a doable kind of thing, or?
Yes. We currently have 2 amazing fellows already for that help the state board staff, every day. So they're fantastic. Sandra and Sandra doing an amazing job. And we have in the past also partnered with individual classes. Dr. Sutter's class at American University, for instance, was the most recent, but we're happy to partner with anyone for that type of activity. There are certain things that sometimes need to happen in order for them to get grades or that type of thing, but I'm happy to work with any of those administrative details to make sure that it works.
Great, thank you.
I will volunteer UDC. I'll start some work with that, Emily, if you can give me some information.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's connect.
All right, you done? All right. So for the research committee, I sent out to everybody on the research committee a Google Doc, and I'm just going to acknowledge that I'm not really good at Google Docs, and I'm going to acknowledge that Zachary was going to help me and didn't. Now, Emily did, but I did it on my own ultimately, and I'm not totally positive everybody got the same thing and the right thing and at the right time. That said, I hope everybody has it. If you don't, from the research committee, please tell me, I'll get you one. It is an initial effort to bring together the different things we've been learning, hearing, saying to each other, trying to capture some of the most relevant facts that we've been hearing, some of the key points that either different speakers or members of the committee have been trying to make. And I tried to be pretty broad in it, but clearly, I'm more capable of saying the principles that were most important to me. And the idea is for everybody to put in, kind of in that style, I guess, what is important, so that we really have a document that will allow us to sort of see where there's a lot of agreement and consensus and where there's not, and what questions we still have among us. Each of us has a different set of questions that we want to put to subsequent speakers, invite speakers to deal with, maybe ask the staff to do some research. but that's sort of where we're at now. So please look at it, and please get it to me before you get all the other ones done, because that's what I need you to do.
No.
No, you can't do that to me, Ruth.
No, because I sent it out last Saturday, so I can. So I
That's
cannot.
right there is Ruth. Saturday.
Yes, so Saturday. That means you will have had it for a week.
She's been
and
in
then give us a
she's been in the queue for a while.
What?
You've been in the queue for a while, Ruth.
Exactly. That's my point. Thank you, Marcus. That's a great way to say it. And so get me your stuff. I'll try to put it all into a document or not, depending on sort of how it comes in and what it seems like it would be the most functional to do. And then that will be a lot of what we do at our next meeting, presumably. The second thing I want to say is based on our last meeting and a lot of subsequent back and forth, we have a good panel coming up at our May meeting to talk about different aspects of the rating system. And I think it'll be very interesting. And it would be part of what we'll be able to do with our document is be able to bring some specific questions there. But I want everybody to sort of have in mind that's where we're headed. And coming out of this meeting, we should be refining our questions, refining our principles, and moving forward to the next. Questions? Comments? Okay. Man, we are so close to on schedule. I just want to applaud everybody. We have administrative and new business. So I don't think there's anything administrative. Am I right, John Paul?
I just want to remind the members of the administrative committee that we do have a meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. And the WebEx information was sent to you. So just wanted to remind you of that. I do also want to make a quick plug, since sort of it-ish at new business. I want to make a quick plug for the National Association of State Board of Education's office hours that they're holding weekly. They're really, really interesting conversations, and I encourage you, if you have a chance, tomorrow's discussion is going to be with members of state boards across the country, specifically on the issues related to distance learning and that we're seeing. And so if you have a chance to join that conversation tomorrow at 3 p.m., I highly encourage you to do so.
And John Paul, you sent us the info on it. We have that. But it's not on our calendar. Can you plug it into our calendars with the info?
Sure, no problem.
That would be helpful.
And I'll also say as an admin note that the budget will be dropping next week. And so I'm sure there'll be communication to members about what our agency will look like, as well as I'm sure plenty of conversation around the education budget in general. So stay tuned to that.
Jessica?
So actually, I have a question because I read through and I still don't really understand. So I read through the council's budget hearing list, and I understand there are very peculiar details around hearings. I understand that each committee got 2 days to do hearings, and they were able to allocate them and deal with testimony in their own ways. I understand that the Education Committee has invited public witnesses only on one day. I imagine that we are invited public witnesses. I have seen other members of the public indicate that they have been invited. Has anyone seen a list of who the invited public witnesses are? And can you steer me towards it?
I have not seen any list. I can certainly request one and see if they will provide it to us. But you are correct. So we are not having an individual agency hearing for the State Board of Education or the Ombudsman or the Student Advocate. Neither is the library system and some of the other agencies as well. So we have been invited to present testimony during the public witness portion of the hearing.
I didn't even understand that.
Sorry. So we are part of the public witness portion. We do not have our own hearing time like OSSE, DME, and DCPS do.
When you say we, who is we?
SBOE.
I understand what that means, but does that mean that we're all going to be witnesses?
No, we have one witness. Ruth will be the witness.
Okay, thank you. So it's not we, it's in this case, she.
The imperial we, Fraser.
We, the people of the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That being said,
Weird, okay.
the
I didn't
committees
get
are
that. Right.
the committees are still accepting testimony through their voicemail system, where you can leave a voicemail testimony, and then that will be transcribed and put into their record, or you can send in written testimony as well. So members of the public are certainly encouraged to do so. And we would love lots of comments in support of the great work that the state board is doing from all of our viewing public on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. And that type of thing as well. Individual members, if you would like to comment on our budget, agency budgets, you should certainly be encouraged to do so. I would appreciate as well. I'm happy to review and edit information if you'd like for me to do that as well. Our budget questions are due on May 22nd, so I'm working on those. We have not received new questions from the previous, but of course, with the changes to our budget, the responses are going to change a little bit. So I will get those out to you as soon as I possibly can, so that you have time to review before they are submitted.
Thank you, John Paul.
New business? Anybody?
It's Teacher Appreciation Week, so show your teachers some love.
Yes, indeed.
Look at my tweets. Since there's no teachers, I went out and took a picture of a photo of every building, every school building that I represent.
I had a picture of my wife and my daughter, who were both teachers.
I love that. I think I saw that. Fraser won the internet today for that post.
Really?
I haven't seen it.
I don't get a chance to look at anything until the evening, so I don't know. But they're both.
I would like to update the board on the process of revamping our equity statement and just giving a look to where this process will go. So my hope is that by our June working session, you will have a draft updated equity definition given everyone's input, as well as a draft equity framework that the board can react on. A few things to note: I've taken the feedback that board members have provided to update the equity statement. That's pretty straightforward. In terms of the equity framework, I've been doing a bit of research, and I'm hoping that this is a bit of iterative process. And so over the next month, I'm going to be discussing the equity framework with various stakeholders. You likely will hear that. You may have people reach out to you. I will likely engage you all in discussion. My hope is then to bring a draft based on that research, those conversations, to our June working session, and then ask you all in your respective boards with your respective groups and stakeholders to then engage to get feedback, to give your input as well as others, for us to then take this up. Ideally, I'm not sure if we're going to have an August meeting, John Paul, but in August, and if not, September, for a formal vote. Why an equity statement? Why an equity framework? I'll just leave you on this. The point is, one, for us to ground much more deeply in our equity focus, and so that it's not just something that's printed on our website with the best of intentions, but that it's something that we anchor on, look towards, and frame our work around. And so just a few ways that I'm hoping of equity framework, because that's a very vague term in general, but that what that might mean is that it's a set of principles that the board is committing to, that our work should work towards, if that makes sense. And so it could be something by which we use to determine whether we're going to take on new priorities. Does it fit our equity framework? Does it advance the priorities that we as a board have said we care about in our equity framework? It could be a way for us to examine past work and do an autopsy of sorts to say, when we go before the council, here's the work that we've done, and this is how the work that we've contributed to over this past year advances our equity interests. And then lastly, it could be a way for us to engage external stakeholders, whether that's at OSSE, DCPS, various charter leaders or the DME, for instance, by anchoring our work there. So more to come there, but I wanted to give you a heads up. I know it's been a while since we talked about it. It's a bit more of an undertaking than I first anticipated, but key deadlines are June working session, and then ideally August for a vote after there have been several rounds of input by you and then external community members.
Not August.
September.
If this has anything to do with new business,
Right.
I think we should have an August meeting. Because like we said,
Actually disagree.
we have no idea what's going to be going on. I think it's important that we meet in August.
Well, I will just,
Nobody's going on vacation anyplace anyway.
I was going to say, typically, I think we don't for that reason. So it may be more possible. Maybe we could pull the board and see what people think. No doubt there is a lot of business going on. This August is unique in multiple ways. One, people aren't leaving, and two, is a lot of different kind of business. So I think we could poll members about that. See where people are.
And then we could have a break in Christmas time or something.
All right, people, anything else? If not, we have, oh, Ashley, is that a hand?
Yeah, hey, just wanted to put it out there for board members. I'm speaking on a panel tomorrow that Running Start and Young Elected, Marcus's group, Young Elected Officials are partnering together on a virtual panel on inspiring the next generation of women leaders. So if you guys have the chance to tune in, would love to see you guys there. I will shoot around the link to register, but it'll be at 3 p.m. tomorrow, and we would love to see you guys on tuning in.
And you're going to send that to us, right?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and shoot you the email to register.
Great.
And I made the flyer for the event, so I'm super proud of that.
Woohoo! Thank you, Marcus.
And Ashley's son is probably starting first grade this year. I'm not sure, but
I actually just went downstairs to put him to sleep. He just went to bed.
Okay.
The way time is moving nowadays, it might be first grade at this point.
Tell me about it.
Jessica?
Ashley just reminded me. So tomorrow at 4:00, I'll be on Instagram Live with the students of MICVA DC. They're doing a youth in quarantine table talk. And I don't know, Marcus, your name wasn't on the advertisement. Did you get back to Robin? Marcus and I were both invited, but I don't know if my buddy, Mr. Batchelor, got back.
Very good reminder, Jessica. Thank you.
All right, so Marcus and I will be talking with the youth of MICVA at 4:00 tomorrow, and hopefully his name will be on the next promotional tweet. But we'll be on Instagram Live at MICVA Challenge DC.
All right. Going once, going twice.
Frankie wants to say goodbye. Say goodbye, Frankie.
Goodbye.
Frankie, saying something and say adjourned.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Right. So